Welcome. We're now at chapter 3 of the textbook, and this is focused on cognitive foundations. This chapter has a lot of information in it, a ton. And just if you were taking this course in person, I won't be talking about every single tiny little thing covered in the chapter in my lecture. But unless it specifically states that you don't need to know something in the overview, you are responsible for everything on the weekly quiz as well as on the final exam. So, cognitive foundations. The word cognitive or cognition means the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. Sounds really complicated, but what we're talking about is the capacity for reasoning, thinking, developing rational thought, problem solving, developing understanding. So, developing the capacity to think, not what somebody thinks, but their thought process. So, when we talk about the cognitive foundations of adolescence, we're talking about how an adolescent develops the ability to think in a more complex manner. How do they really develop the ability to think? As a child, their level of cognitive complexity is more simple. As an adolescent, it's more developed. That is what the three scenarios at the beginning of the chapter are trying to demonstrate. That much like the biological process of puberty, cognitive development of an adolescent will occur no matter where they are in the world, unless there's a problem. During adolescence, there isn't just a whole whack of physical changes that occur. The very manner in which their mind actually works and processes information also undergoes significant development. Any discussion of cognitive development necessarily includes Jean Piaget. It's literally like a law, and you'll go to jail if you don't discuss him. Not just because he's included in this textbook, but because he is absolutely one of the cognitive theorists you will find in every single textbook ever produced on this subject in every single discipline. Much like you can't avoid puberty as an adolescent, you cannot avoid discussing Jean Piaget when discussing adolescent thought processes. He was a Swiss psychologist who is still known the world over for his work focusing on child development. And his theory of cognitive development is something you will encounter in every course you ever take that has anything to do with human development. He said that as a human being develops, as they grow older, as they mature, their development proceeds in very distinct stages. And within each of these stages, we can see the person thinking about the world in a particular way associated with each stage. This doesn't mean everybody thinks the same things. It means that their thinking operates in the same manner. It follows the same processes. Their ability to think and the process of their thinking varies according to which developmental stage they're in. Except he uses the term mental structure instead of the term process. So when I'm talking about mental structures, I'm talking about mental processes. Piaget said that at each cognitive stage he identifies, a person's thinking processes or mental structures will be relatively the same. So for everybody, from about birth to age 2, they all think and understand using the same mental processes or the same mental structures. For everybody from about age 2 to 7, they think and understand using the same mental processes or the same mental structures, and so on. When you're reading about theory, whether it's this one or others, if you can start by putting the theory into everyday, more simple words, I find that it just helps everybody understand it easier. So exchanging the term mental structure for what we understand better, the term mental processes, I find it can really help. So what Piaget meant by mental structures, mental processes, was that in each cognitive stage, the mental processes you use to think about one thing are the same mental processes you use to think about everything. A person is not going to have really basic and simple mental processes when they think about one thing or process information, but then really advanced mental processes or structures thinking about something else. He said the mind just doesn't work that way. If that is the way they think, well, that is the way they think. They are within that stage. They are processing information with that mental structure. They are processing information with that kind of process at that speed. And because the approach he took was to view cognitive development as changing with age, we refer to his theory as the cognitive developmental approach. Now, why did Piaget say our cognitive abilities develop this way? What did he say causes cognitive ability to develop and become more complex? Maturity, maturation. He said human beings are genetically programmed to develop through certain stages within a certain general age range, provided that everything is relatively normal and not harmful in some way. And I find the textbook explains this really, really well, stating that an 8-year-old is simply not going to be able to learn something a 13-year-old can. Because cognitively speaking, in terms of their cognitive development, their thinking, their process of thinking is simply not at the same level as a 13-year-old. And that teaching a 13-year-old something an 8-year-old should learn will be pretty simple and quick for them because their maturity and cognitive developmental level will be much more advanced. This is why we have different expectations with our curriculum at each grade. And it just makes sense, doesn't it? And this probably seems kind of overly simplistic to you. So remember, this is important because Piaget was viewing all of this in a very different manner. So he didn't just look at this and say, oh, it's too hard for her. She's too young for that. Piaget looked at it and said, why is that too hard for her? Because developmentally speaking, her cognitive maturity is lacking. Because her cognitive development has not progressed and developed enough for her to be able to think about it properly. So Piaget focused solely on maturation, on actual cognitive development. He did not focus on environmental influences. He doesn't really take that into account a lot. He didn't believe that a child's environment acted on them and had a really significant effect or influence on their cognitive development. Because he said, again, as human beings, these are simply stages that we're programmed to go through genetically from an evolutionary perspective, however you want to put it. Instead, he said a child will act on the environment in a manner that matches their own cognitive maturity. So I hope this is all making sense to you so far between my explanation and the textbook. If not, go back and reread the text or re-watch the lecture. It's totally normal to have to look at something more than once to completely understand it. So don't feel like you have to get it all at once the first time. Now, Piaget then went into a little bit more detail using the idea of schemes. And again, this is a term that we tend to use differently, so it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's pretty straightforward, so don't let the term scheme throw you off. When he talks about schemes, what he meant was that a person will organize information in their head according to different categories. Schemes are just organizational categories that people have in their heads. So think of like your head's a filing cabinet, and every folder in your filing cabinet is a different scheme. It's a different category. I like to use gender as an easy example to explain the idea of schemes. If we showed a child, a bunch of clothes and asked them to sort the clothes into a pile for girls and a pile for boys, they would do this by relying on the categories or the schemes in their head that tell them what is masculine and what is feminine. They would rely on the schemes, their mental structures for organizing and interpreting information in their head, to tell them where things should go. We all have schemes or schemata in our head for a variety of things that we organize into categories. We just don't think of it that way. We don't realize we're doing it. So this is a good one. Dog. Ears, 4 legs, tail. That thing has ears, 4 legs, and a tail, so that must be a dog. That's the category it's going to go into. And each individual person has schemes or categories they have developed and decided on for male and female, good and bad, appropriate and inappropriate, okay and not okay, sexual and not sexual, and so on. Piaget said this is what occurs with children too. And at each stage of their cognitive development, their schemes will change. What they think belongs in each category might shift, which makes sense when you think about it because you know that you don't think about things the same way at every age. So, when these schemes or organizational structures in our head are created and modified, this happens using assimilation and accommodation. If a person's presented with new information that already fits in one of their categories, it already fits in one of their schemes, well, that's pretty easy. You just put it in the file. You just file that information in the existing scheme, and that's all there is to it. You assimilate the information into schemes you already have, and because they fit, nothing else is needed. That's it. Just like a filing cabinet when a folder already exists. But if a person is presented with information that does not automatically fit into an existing scheme, well, then they have to accommodate it in some way. They have to change an existing scheme in some way so that they can adapt to this information. You have to make it fit into a folder. And I'm going to use the example of gender again and clothes. And yes, I'm completely relying on stereotypes just because using this stereotype provides us an easy example. If this child is given a pile of clothes to sort into a pile for girls and a pile for boys, they'll probably put all the skirts and dresses and all the pink and, ice cream colors in the girl pile, and all the pants and the dark reds and blues in a boy pile. But then they come across a pair of pink pants. Well, according to the schemes they have, they know that pink is supposed to be only for girls and pants are supposed to be only for boys. So they'll have to adjust their thinking. They'll have to adjust their organizational categories in their brain, adjust their schemes to accommodate something that doesn't automatically assimilate into the pre-existing schemes in their mind. And by the way, this doesn't just happen with children, it happens with all ages. Adults have to accommodate information according to their pre-existing schemes all the time. And as you can see on the slide, okay, well, that has 4 legs and a tail and ears, but that's not a dog because it's also licks and climbs and it meows. So then they have to accommodate that and create the new scheme of a cat.